All right, hello, Honors 110. So for today's class, we're going to be talking about one of the more provocative stories of the session, I think. I know we just came out of Cat Person, which also might meet that description. But so we have Carmen Maria Machado's The Husband Stitch. And so with this, I want to start with the title of the piece, which I know we've done this a few times over the course of the session here. But so the title, The Husband Stitch, first off, I would suggest is, again, similar to Cat Person, not the most obvious title necessarily for this story. And so I'm curious what we think of it, why we think this was the title that Machado went with, particularly in consideration to the actual husband Stitch, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment here, plays a relatively minor role in the story, I would suggest. Some of you may disagree with me, but nonetheless, at least in terms of page space, it's a fairly small component of the story. And so why that would become kind of the focal point in such a prominent place as the title here. Beyond that, though, I want to kind of probe the topic of the husband stitch itself. I realize some of you may have been able to piece together by context in the story what that is. Some of you may have looked it up, and some of you may have known. I found this is often a kind of gendered thing, where oftentimes, more frequently, I should say, women in the class are more familiar with this concept than men. I think there may be all kinds of reasons for that, but then there's all kinds of other space for how we sort of think about and understand these things. But to give just a real base level definition to make sure that everyone knows what we're talking about here in general. This is a stitch that after a woman gives birth vaginally, it's a stitch to seal her back up after some tearing that tends to happen in most cases with childbirth. And so the husband stitch is an extra stitch that is medically unnecessary, that's there traditionally for the purposes of the male sexual partner's pleasure afterwards, the next time that they have sex. And so this is a procedure that many would consider to be barbaric. I will count myself among those people just to show my hand. But nonetheless, it has historically been a common enough practice that it has its own name, that it has kind of some discussion surrounding it. And so we do sort of see it in this story. In this moment, I'm going to argue that Machado is drawing our attention to this moment as representative of some bigger things happening in this story. But maybe I'll leave it there because I'm really interested in what the class has to say about this being the title and what the significance of this procedure is ultimately in this story. But I want to hit on some other kind of big picture things related to this story, how it's structured and some of the plot points here. So one element of the story that's quite unusual is I call them stage directions. So we have that material right at the beginning of the story that tells us how to read each character's voice. Later on, we have these moments like when someone is supposed to ask for a secret from someone, then yell it out a window, or someone's supposed to put a bunch of coins in a jar and shake it in somebody's face. This is all pretty unusual for a story. I'm just curious about kind of the impact on that for you as a reader, but also why we think Machado would choose to incorporate that in the story. Otherwise, there's this really central symbol in the story of the green ribbon, the ribbon around our protagonist's neck. And so I'm just curious of what we make of that. I think that, on a literal level, it's kind of the stuff of horror. It might have read familiar to some folks who read some of the scary stories to tell in the dark kind of stuff where this story kind of derives from. But in any event, what's kind of its importance or the meaning we see in this ribbon? I think we can take that both from a more literal, but probably in a more interesting way, in a more symbolic, kind of metaphorical way. What's this sort of representing ultimately in this story? Another aspect of this story is that we have these embedded stories within a story, right? And so, for example, there's the couple that's hooking up in a car with a serial killer on the loose outside the car, and the woman kind of has the sense to know that probably they should leave, but the man kind of insists on persisting until their doom seems pretty imminent. Stories like this, I'm curious about sort of our read of them, why we think they're there. What they kind of add to the story or the broader messaging of the story. And one that I think is especially sort of important here from my read of it is on page 4, there's that bit about the narrator seeing toes in the potato bin at the store. And so she is sure that she has seen this, but when she tells her father about it, he sort of dismisses it, right? And condescends a little bit in this case, but it is, a father to a child. So this, sort of makes some sense, but kind of in saying like, there's no way there were toes in there. You're seeing things. Why would they ever keep toes in there? This is so silly. It's absurd. Your imagination is playing tricks on you. Even though she's the one who saw it. Right. And I think this is a really interesting moment in the story about what someone observes versus what other people might say that they observed, how we know if someone actually saw something. I think Machado is inviting us to have some of these deeper conversations here, particularly in a context of relationship, sex, and love, the unit that we're on, but also in terms of power dynamics, in terms of microaggressions is sort of a buzzword, but sort of these small injustices that sort of might be dismissed, but actually might carry significant weight. I'm really curious to hear what the class has to say about all of that. I want to go to one other specific part here. This is on page 12. It's the part where the narrator is talking about her experience with this other woman and growing infatuated with her. And when she tells her husband about it, his reaction is, I think, very telling about who he is and about the larger project that Machado is getting at here, in that he's not offended by it. He's not sort of put off by her being attracted to someone else. He doesn't sort of dismiss it as a flight of fancy. He, in a way, sort of leans into it and wants to hear more, but also wants to take over the conversation and not so much hear more as just talk about his own fantasies in this realm, and kind of very much kind of make it sort of an objectification of his own wife and of this other woman. And so in any event, I'm curious what we think about that too, in terms of what that tells us about these characters, about their situation, about their marriage. I think there's a lot there. So I think this is a really rich story with a lot of moving pieces, a lot of room for interpretation here. I know it's also a relatively explicit story, which makes some students uncomfortable, but I hope you're able to kind of see your way through to the end of it, because I just think there is a great deal here to kind of unpack and kind of read some meaning into. But okay, I'm going to leave off the video there. So as always, I'll look forward to our discussion, and thanks for watching.